called a single audit to have an audit. The SEC wants an audit because you are an issuer of more than $10 million in debt. So because you've done more than $10 million in debt, the SEC wants you to do an annual filing to send the report to your investors who have basically invested in your bonds. And the DOR wants a report just because in Massachusetts they want to see what's going on from an operational standpoint, management letter, so on and so forth. So there's a lot of reasons why this audit is done. And again, if something forensically comes up, we are required to bring it to the attention of management. And things do come up in our audits, but it's not something we go in to try to search for. So very small items. I just want to make sure that the public and the council knows that we're not out there looking for someone that's maybe taken $100 or to that effect. And we'll have a little conversation about some fraud procedures that the city is doing to prevent or mitigate anything fraudulent. We'll talk about that a little bit later in the report. So in the current year, we did give a clean opinion. So a qualified opinion means that there were things that we couldn't get, the city couldn't provide for us. Whether it's a liability that you couldn't calculate, whether it's cash was out of balance, whether it's receivables that are being out of balance, then we would issue what's called a qualification in the opinion. The city got a clean opinion, which means none of those things existed. So that's good. That's good news. The city's had a clean opinion for at least 20 straight years, maybe even longer that I can recollect. I'll go back and research. So we've continued that trend. The city also did a CAFR. What's it, Ned? 20, at least 20, about 20 years? 20 straight years? A CAFR is not an easy achievement. The typical report is about 40 or 50 pages. This is 150 pages. There's all kinds of information that goes into this CAFR that the financial team has to put a lot of that together. So there's just a tremendous amount of effort to go, and it's an optional report. I know it's required under your charter, but in the outside world, this is an optional report. You don't have to do it, and the city has chosen to put it in the charter as a requirement. It's transparent. It shows a lot of information, and it's a very good report, and the city should be proud of compiling this. I'm not sure if you've gotten the award yet for 2019.
I don't think so. They delayed.
They're just starting to come out. We do about 10 of these, and 3 of them have gotten the award so far. So
we usually have it by now.
Yeah. Let us know when that comes in. So that's just an oversight of why we're here, what we're doing, and any questions on that before I continue?
Nope, I don't see any.
Okay, super.
I'll have some questions at the end.
Okay, so on page 4, I thought it was really important to highlight what the city has accomplished in the last 10 years. And so I thought one way to do that, when you say, hey, how's the city doing? How's an entity doing? The way I measure it is I look at the reserve balances. Are the reserve balances increasing or are they decreasing? Are they decreasing so that they're deficits, or are they going up in a nice straight line and then maybe stabilizing? And I thought it kind of tells a story about the management of a particular community. If your reserves are steadily increasing, that means that you're managing your budget very well. Your expenses are under control. You're usually turning back some expenses back to the general fund, and you're usually doing very well with your revenues. Your revenues, you're not aggressively forecasting revenues. I'm involved in situations with other towns where they aggressively forecast revenues that really are not achievable. So what happens is when those revenues don't come in, you end up with a deficit at the end of the year. And to me, that's poor management. That's not what's happening here. And this is part of the reason why you're getting a very nice bond rating, is you've got this nice, if you go back to 2010, you had about 14 million in reserves. And right now you have about 40 million in reserves. So you've had a nice, steady, it peaked at 45 and then kind of dropped back down. looks like you're kind of stabilizing in this area, which is good, which is very good to stabilize. Any questions on those reserves? Okay, on the next page, I just wanted to show how Chelsea basically compared to what's out there for metrics. So Standard & Poor, who does your bond rating, is looking for 15% of reserves to give you a score of a 1 in reserves. And you folks are at almost 26%. So you're 11% over the Standard & Poor metric, which is great. The state average is about 10%, so you're over double the state average. And then the low metric is 4%. That's when your bonds are dropping in rating appeal. So I just wanted to kind of do like an illustration to show you where you folks stand with respect to other metrics. Any questions on that? Okay, let's talk about why reserves are going up. So your reserves increased from 18 to 19. They did continue to increase. Your local receipts exceeded the forecast by 7.7 million at the end of 19. Your expenses were 4.2 million under budget. So that's an $11.9 million operating surplus. You also used free cash of about 8.9 million, so that eats into it. So it caused your reserves to go up by the 11.9 minus the 8.9. So your reserves went up by about $3 million. So that's just an explanation of why the reserves went up. And some of the receipts that were way over, your permits did great, your motor vehicle excise did great, some of your meals tax, did very well. So some of these things came in a lot better than forecast. Not sure where with the lockdown in the fourth quarter of 2020, I'm not sure if this trend continued into 2020 or not. Not sure if that's a conversation, that we can introduce now or not. And some towns are saying, let's talk about that. But as of 19, things were very much under control at the end of 19.
Can I stop?
Yeah.
My understanding, and this has been going on for a few years now, is because the volatility of whether or not we get a large amount of excise tax from enterprise is the majority of that revenue that isn't reported, isn't funded. So that if it does come in, then great. But is this still the case that a lot of the excise taxes, rather, or that we're saying that the number that is projected in, say, our budget for receipts is undervalued for a while because the city purposely doesn't count on the excise tax, and then when it finally does come in, that's the gist of the overrun. Is that a fair statement to say?
Yes, I think the majority of this large revenue reserve was generated by excess motor vehicle excise tax receipts over the course, certainly of the last 4 or 5 years that I've been here. We have historically been conservative in estimating that revenue source because it is somewhat volatile, and for each of the past years that I've been here, the number has substantially exceeded our estimate. Last year, just for perspective of where we are now, where that number is really at risk, we collected last year, it appears, although the final audit isn't done obviously, but it appears we collected around 21 million in motor vehicle excise tax. For this budget year, for creation of the FY21 budget, we have estimated a third of that, 7 million. I'm hoping that we're going to reach that. Our residents support about 3.5 million of that. So we're not relying a whole lot on enterprise for a good reason, because the industry is pretty much in serious trouble. But I'm hoping we'll collect 7 million, a third of what we collected in FY20. So it's a little bit risky, but it's a fairly conservative number given we collected 21 million last year.
Okay.
That's good to know, because, yes, some of the, cities that are reliant on, like Everett, for example, is reliant on the casino. You know, they're obviously have to budget conservatively also, so where you have the big, large reliance on enterprise, you know, it's good to be very conservative in this, and I agree with the city manager's approach, to estimating that.
Well, I think everyone's gonna be hit hard. We had been lucky in having high occupancy rates at the local hotels. And, you know, and then of course there's the meals tax receipts. So we're expecting those numbers to come back down significantly. I just don't know where we are. I know you provided these reports.
I sent the, I know, I did send the council we haven't got the quarterly, we just got, which hasn't been reported yet, because it will be reported to you when I send you September's full receipt. We have received the meals tax receipts for the first quarter, which are surprisingly not too bad. I'm surprised by it. I'm really looking forward to the room excise tax number, which apparently is gonna be reported on Friday to us. So I'll have a sense as to what the first quarter. We have received about 2 million in the past annually from that number. I am estimating for FY21's tax, for our budget, 700,000. So let's see where we get. So that requires us to generate a quarter, a little under 200,000. We'll see what we get. I mean, we haven't had zero occupancy, but it's significantly less than where it was. So let's see what we get the first quarter.
Yeah, I'm expecting the occupancies to be down. It will be reported on Friday, as the city manager has indicated. The meals tax is surprisingly has held up because of the takeouts. A lot of people are still doing the takeouts. They're not cooking at home. And what's happening, even in my house, where people were locked down, so they weren't all out doing their thing. We were doing more takeouts because who wants to cook a meal for 7 people? I got 7 people in my house, so I'd be like, let me just go grab something. It's a lot
a day.
Yeah, it's a lot easier. So and there was always lines when I went to places. So I said to myself, I don't think the meals tax is going to be hit that badly. And we're seeing the numbers coming in a lot higher than people had anticipated on the meals tax side. The hotel, that's a different story.
So Tom, I have a question. I know that this past year, I think we had some revenue based on car sharing entities, Uber and Lyft. My question is does that still apply on Uber Eats? Because many of the businesses are using Uber Eats as a delivery, and do we get still a piece, even though they're not carrying an individual? If a local restaurant is using Uber Eats to using the car sharing, is that revenue still there?
Yeah, I don't know the answer to that question. You'd have to probably look at the fine details of the statute that determines how that 20 cents gets allocated. I don't know if Uber Eats qualifies for that number.
Yeah, I don't either. That is a good question though. Yeah, I don't know the answer to that either.
Okay.
We'll see if we can get an elastic tree.
I was just gonna say, if you can get an answer to that, that'd be great.
Because I'm thinking it's still, there is an Uber charge, and so there's got to be.
And if we do get it, it wouldn't be nothing. I mean,
No,
it's
it'll be-
pretty
yeah.
significant, I think, for as you could see
Yeah.
with the.
I just don't know if the state's calculating.
Council Lopez?
I just want to ask about, I want to know how much percentage we get from Uber or Lyft. How much we get?
What was the number that we got last year?
Our share of that transportation network charge has been around 80,000 annually, and it's used for roadway work, so we usually appropriate it for asphalt to do additional.
That's how much Uber and Lyft pay for the service?
No, it's a fee that the state charges for every pickup, and the state takes a piece of it, and a piece comes back to the municipality where the pickup occurred. And so, when they did the calculation for the number of Lyft and Uber pickups that happened in Chelsea last year, we were allocated, I think the number was 80,000, and so it has to be used on local roadways, and so you just appropriated that in September for the amount we got for a calendar, I think it's calendar year basis, so we just put it in the account for more asphalt.
Thank you, actually, I was just curious, I didn't know, I was, thank you.
So, yeah, just continuing on page 6. That was a good discussion on receipts. You were also, on your expense side, you were 4.2 million under. So 19 ended up, in the positive. And the city's got a AA bond rating. I wanted to, put that out there. That's not easy to get. You got a AA bond rating, especially with the demographics of the city. To be a AA bond rating, you've got to be doing a lot of other things really well, because you're not going to score high in the demographic profile, which is your per capita income and things like that. So having those nice reserves, and Standard & Poor's did indicate that the management of the city is strong. You have strong financial policies and procedures, and management is strong, and management meets the targets in your financial policies and procedures. So you've got a very good grade there, and that's what leveraged your AA bond rating. Getting to a AAA is probably next to impossible, just because of the demographic profile. But you're doing great on the financial side and the economic side. So how do you, next page, how do you keep your bond rating? Don't put it at risk. Have you gotten a bond rating lately,
Yeah, we got one,
AA again?
And I think it's almost impossible for us to move up from that number.
It is.
Per
It
capita
is.
income
It is.
Not that we can't change that.
There was a point, I think it was Medford I was helping with their bond rating, and they had, I think they have a AA plus, so they're slightly higher. They thought they might lose it because it was right when the state aid was in question, that you might be losing 10 or 15% on state aid. And it was great because the bond rating call was going to be like on a Thursday, and the state made the announcement on Wednesday that they were going to flat level the state aid from the year before. And so when we spoke with the S&P guy, he was like, yeah, with the whole environment and everything, this might have slipped from the AA plus to AA, but they ended up giving them, reiterating the AA plus. But it's very difficult. So you guys are where you're at. I don't think you can go higher than that. And so congratulations on at least maintaining it. And some of the ways to maintain it is just conserve your free cash. The S&P likes to see you spending free cash on snow deficits, one-time things like that. Capital, they like to see you spending it on capital because you're avoiding borrowing and incurring financing costs. So they don't mind seeing capital being spent for free cash. Keep forecasting your revenues conservatively, which it sounds like the team is doing that based on the conversation. Enhance revenue where you can. I don't know if you've looked at fees and things like that, and if they haven't changed in years, you may want to look at what surrounding communities are doing for fees. There may be a way to increase some of your local fees. And then just monitor the budget aggressively like you have been. Keep doing your long-term financial projections, enforce your financial reserve policies, and OPEB is important. Keep putting money in OPEB. The bond rating agency love that.
Council Brown?
Thank you, and I apologize for being early today, coming in from Boston. So you spoke of other communities, and one way to do it was maybe increase some of our fees. Have you looked at our fees and see a potential where we can increase certain fees on?
One of the things, I have not done that specifically, but what were your demand fees? I think for, like motor vehicle, not motor vehicle, your real estate and, yeah, and motor vehicle and
That
things.
hasn't changed. I think actually it did change a couple of years ago. Our treasurer had gone out and recommended.
Yeah, you're allowed to go to $30.
Yeah.
And what I was finding is in some of the other places,
At one point.
you were 10, yeah, and I didn't know if you changed that or not. So that was one of the things when I did a survey, before I was even your auditor, I saw that you folks were low
Yeah.
when I did the survey. It was about 2 years ago. So I don't know if that kind of got you to say, hey, maybe we should go higher. The average is about 20. Some of them do go to $30. So what a demand fee is if you're late on your motor vehicle excise or one of your payments, you're allowed to attach a charge on that when you rebill. And the state allows you to go as high as $30 on that. And I was finding that a lot of communities were still at $5 and $10. And when I was doing the math, it was coming out to like a couple of $100,000 if you increase it because there's so much demand activity. So that's the sort of thing that hopefully I prompted that when I called and asked for the survey, and I said, ooh, that's a little low, so that might have prompted you to switch. But that's like an area that's a good example of how you can enhance some revenues. And I haven't specifically looked at all your fees or done any sort of a survey comparing you to the surrounding communities, but it's something that internally your staff.
We have, our treasurers looked at that, the ISD people have looked at their fees, the DPW office has looked at fees, and we've made changes where we can for the street opening permits and the backflow devices. Those have started to be implemented this year.
Yeah, and I'm not sure what you do we didn't specifically go into dog fees because it's not a big part of the city, so we didn't go in and audit that, but I don't, that's where I find that there could be some better processes when I go look at, when a city says, can you go look at the dogs, what we're doing for dog licenses, I usually find that there could be better practices in those areas. So that might be an area you might want to take a peek at. Are you capturing all the dogs out there? Are you not? What's our process to make sure we do have all the dogs, and are our fees reasonable? So that's an area where you can boost it up. I know Springfield, Mass, had a company come in, and they were only collecting 25 or 30,000 in dog fees. They had a company come in and do like a study, and they got it up to like $300,000 or $400,000 in collections of dog fees. So it's definitely an area where if you do have a lot of dogs that you can do things with. So those are just kind of examples of how you might be able to get some extra revenues.
Thank you.
Tom, I'm looking at larger places as far as trying to get some savings here. In taking advantage of the rating that we've had for a while now, and also like many homeowners and property owners of the interest rates, has any of our long-term debt been evaluated to see if we can't refinance at this point to take advantage of these new lower rates that are out there? Maybe pay off some of the ones that are really low just to get them off our books, so to speak?
Yes, we did a refinancing last year that came to the council. Our bond council is always looking at an opportunity, so probably we'll look at that again for this coming year and see if there's anything. But we did do a refinancing last year and saved a little bit of money.
Okay.
So the city uses Hilltop Securities as your financial advisor. They're very, very aggressive. They are very good about they'll look at all your debt, they'll throw it through a program, and they'll figure out if it's good for you to refinance or not. So you're in good hands with them. And it makes our work more difficult because now we got to go through these refinancing transactions. But Hilltop already told us, be prepared. This is going to be the year of refinancing. So I wouldn't be surprised if you're on the on the list somewhere of taking some of those older bonds and saving a few bucks.
In addition to the refinancing, if you recall, when we liquidated that old land sales account, we paid off a large existing bond authorization. So that was another thing that they recommended.
And we were limited because you had some plans that we thought we could use that money, but it turned out that, the state didn't allow you to, correct?
Statutes around.
Statutes allowed about the limitations of that
Say you
usage,
have to pay
yeah.
off the debt
Right.
first. And then
But we
when
did, we paid off the debt and we did a refinancing last year.
Okay.
But as he said, Hilltop is good, I'm very satisfied.
Yeah. Okay, let's go to page 8 and 9 are really important things that sometimes get overlooked. One is, page 8 is your other post-employment benefits, your OPEB, and for the public, other post-employment benefits are payments you have to make for people that have worked for the city who retire as city employees that you contribute towards their health insurance. And the overseers have put out this GASB, so to speak, this requirement that you have to calculate that liability. So while Ned hasn't, Ed, sorry, Ned, while Ed hasn't retired yet, you're actually, your OPEB is actually being factored into this number. He hasn't retired yet, but they're saying at some point he's going to retire, so they start to say, what's that liability now? And they do that for every single employee in the city, and they come up with this gigantic number. It's 206 million. Yeah, 206 million for the city. And the person that does that, it's actuarial firms come out and do that calculation for you. You send them all kinds of information. Is it female? Is it a male? What's your age? What departments are you working in? And then they do this massive crunch of a number and say, in order for you to fund, if you had this in an account right now, you would be able to fund the people that are currently working for the city and who are going to retire. You'd be able to fund them out of this account on an annual basis. That's kind of what this whole calculation is. And that's a good sized number, but it compares to Medford and Malden. It's very comparable. Everett, it compares. All those cities are in the 200 to 250 million range. So it's not like you're behind or anything like that. So one of the things that was important this past year is that the monies that you've been putting into OPEB, you voted to create a trust, an irrevocable trust, plan document. You went through that whole process, which now allowed you to move that money from just a stabilization fund into a trust. And the reason that's important is it gives you some flexibility. The discount rate the actuary uses is 3.25%. The higher that discount rate is, the lower your liability is going to be. So by moving it into a trust fund, it gives the actuary the ability or flexibility to increase that rate if conditions apply. Like if you start putting in a little bit more money, or if your investments start earning a little bit more, that number could go up. And right now it's not going up because you've only got $2 million in assets against a $200 million liability. So they're being conservative and keeping it at the 3.25%. So any questions on OPEB?
So can you explain a little bit, I guess, a little bit more in layman terms so we're throwing money into an account, but we've set up funds, or rather buckets, so to speak, to earn a return?
Yes.
And we're hoping that the return that we're earning supersedes what our payments are going to be? Is that what's he saying?
In the future, yeah. In the future. So if you start putting money, what's going to happen, what I'm telling all my clients is it's impossible for you to fund it the way you should be right now, because you should have started this back in 1970 if you were going to be where you should be, and that hasn't happened. So what I'm telling all my clients is your pension is in great shape. You're almost 70% funded. So that's going to fall off in probably, 12 years about? That's going to...
Sooner than that.
8 years.
8 years. That's going to fall off. So that big pension expense payment that you have to make to the pension fund, that goes away and it becomes much lower. Now it creates millions of dollars that you can put towards OPEB. And that's when you're gonna start really hitting this liability hard. And when you do that, that discount rate's gonna go up to 7%. That's gonna help your liability. The fact that you're putting in, what's your pension assessment right now? About
10, 12.
12 million?
Yeah.
So you figure you're still gonna have to pay about 2 a year for the normal cost. You might be freeing up as much as $10 million a year to put towards OPEB starting 8 years from now. And that's when you'll really start to make a dent into this number. But it's good to keep putting the dribs and drabs in here. It shows the bond people that you're thinking about it, that you're not neglecting it, that you have a plan, and they like to see the little 100, 200, $300,000.
We have been doing that except for 21. We're gonna spend it in 21 just this year, but we have.
And that's totally understandable. I don't believe they're gonna punish you for that, so, you know, that's what I'm hearing, they completely understand why, you know, a lot of towns, cities and towns are not making that payment this year.
Todd?
So, Mr. City Manager, if you could just refresh my memory. I believe that in our new councilor orientation last January or whatever it was, that the number stood at 180 million, I think. So it's expanded to 200 million? Or is that, am I remembering correctly?
Yeah, I thought we just got we might have just done a new,
It's every 2 years.
every 2 years,
So-
yeah. Whatever number I gave you was the most recent one that I had at that point.
Yeah.
So there might have been a subsequent evaluation. I will tell you that one thing that's gonna help, in the next time we do this, you would expect this number to go up, but one thing we're gonna really be helped by is the fact that all of our retirees, all of them at 65, have been forcibly put into Medicare.
That will help you
We pay the
significantly.
penalty for it, but they're all in Medicare, and that should help to moderate the rise in
Yes.
this number significantly.
Yes, that will help. Any revisions, plan revisions you make that benefit the city, help that number. What's the contribution rate right now for retirees?
70-30 for most.
Yeah.
70-30?
Yeah,
So-
they pay 30%.
They pay 30, you pay 70, which isn't bad. That's you know, 80-20, 70-30 is kind of the norm. Some are doing 50-50, but they're getting big OPEB liabilities because of that.
So we'll have another actuarial study done for fiscal 20. So we're providing kind of the information now with a new study, another couple of months, probably by the end of the year.
And the problem is, you're gonna see this number go up, I would suspect, because the bond rates went down because of what happened with COVID. So on June 30th, the bond rates were down to about 2.5 or 2.6. So that discount rate's gonna go down a little bit, I think, and it's gonna cause this liability to increase. So unless the Medicaid thing is effective with this new valuation.
I'm not sure when those.
No, they all, that took effect on July 1 of 2020.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So maybe the next time that'll show up, but I don't think it's gonna show in this evaluation.
So I mean, it's a liability down the road. You're obligated to pay the retirees. You have that liability. It's a benefit that you offer to get people to come work for the city. So it's something to. I always like to talk about it because it's such a big number, and I want everyone thinking about it. The next page is good news. There's your pension liability. The net pension liability is down to 79, I mean, where are we here? Well, 79.8 million, that's your net pension liability. Okay, that improved by $14.8 million. The discount rate is 7.25 because you have sufficient funds in the pension. You've been funding it since 1991, I believe, so you've got 30 years of really good funding into this pension. So they're allowed to use a better discount rate. They can make better use of the investments. The percentage that you funded is 67.5, so like I said earlier, about 70%. That's great. There's not many communities that are at at that level. In fact, the counties, a lot of towns and cities belong to county systems where you have your own. The counties are at 45, 48, 50%. They're very low. So this is a really good number. So and like I said, it's at the high end of state averages. So I think your pension liability, this is good news on your pension liability.
It was due to drop off in 6 years, when the rates went down on current investments, we had to extend the payment.
Right, because it used to be 8%, I bet, at one point. And now they've dropped it to 7.25. All right. I put an informational item. That's really just for the accounting department. There's some new lease accounting standards, so you've got a little bit more work to do, and not this year, but next year. But that was just a reminder type thing. We don't have to.
That's what we need. Bring it on.
Yeah. We don't have to waste a lot of the council time on that. I'm now going to turn it over to Paul, who's going to go through some of the observations we made, as a result of the audit. So I've done the economic side, kind of the trends, what's important financially. Paul's going to talk about some findings that we've had. So.
All right, thanks, Tony. Again, my name is Paul Gargano. Also, like Tony, I go back to the 1990s with Chelsea as well, with some of my prior audit firm experience. So the first three of our observations were actually carryovers from your prior audit firm, but we felt that they were significant enough that we should also comment on them. The first was fraud prevention measures. The city did substantially make progress on this during the year. They hired firms to do a financial operations review and also an assessment of the current fraud prevention initiatives. So basically what we want to see is the city develop a plan based on those two documents, to improve the fraud prevention and internal controls. One of the things that we do usually recommend is that the finance team, usually out of the city auditor's office, choose on a rotating basis certain departments to visit throughout the year, just to make sure that the measures, once they're in place, are still operating as they were intended. That's usually something we like to recommend.
So should we be concerned about anything?
Not particularly. I mean, there's no, as Tony said, there was no, if we had found anything during our audit, we would be required to report that to you, and we do not have anything of that nature to report. One of the things we do like is, as I was sitting down talking about fraud prevention with the staff, was you're limiting your cash collections, which, that's the number one thing. Limit cash collections, push online, and that's probably one of the best things you guys could do.
And those that we are receiving, we're requiring them to be turned into the treasurer's office on a specific scheduled basis. It's not as they get around to it, they're required to do it weekly. That's good. And the treasurer's office will look for that. You still get some at the library, a little bit at the community schools.
In your work, I would ask, what are problem departments that should receive higher scrutiny because they tend to be the areas that fraud could exist? Because not all departments handle cash and so forth. So I'm just curious, what are the typical things that should be looked at, or so in your experience?
Building is that's a big one that we've seen some problems, and I'm not saying here, but in prior
Building as in, you mean the
building department permits,
building department permits? Okay.
things with inspections. The other one that we see, town clerks, because they take a lot of cash. We haven't specifically looked at this city clerk's office, but the last one I did, they had a box, and that's where they put the cash. There was no receipt, pre-numbering, there was none of that going on. It was just going into a box. Someone could have took there was a woman that worked in that office for 40 years. She could have took $20 a day, and I did the calculation. It would come out to over $200,000, and no one would know that, because only $20 would be missing, and no one would know. And because there was no pre-numbering, what I like to see is that receipts go out, they're numbered, And then at the end of the day, you said, okay, I did fit 1 to 50, they're $5 each, I should have $250 in the till. There should be that reconciliation going on. A lot of these point of sale systems that are out there now are doing that. You do it through a cash register. I don't know, you don't have point of sale here, right?
No, we've got the kiosk for payments, in the lobby. We've got online payments and we've got, online registration for, community schools.
Yeah, because Revere does the Munis online point of sale. They implemented that. So every department that receives cash gets a cash register, and then it forces you to reconcile, and then it posts automatically throughout the city. I don't know if you need that based on what you're doing, but it was something that Revere had done. And one of the red flags, which we would pick up in the audit, is what we do is we look at revenues, and it's a real quick test. We look at revenues 18, 19, 20. Is something happening? Is it consistent? If you increase fees, we would expect that revenue to go up. If there's, for some reason, there's less activity, but we would talk to Ed if we saw something unusual, like building permits drop, and we'd say, hey, what's going on in building permits? And then Ed would offer an explanation, and if the explanation didn't make sense, we'd say, well, Ed, that doesn't make sense. Maybe we need a closer look at that. So we do that in the audit. We actually look at year-to-year trends, and I'm sure you do that as part of your process. You do the same thing, so that if you see something really dropping off, it's going to cause you to go. Yeah, it's going to cause you to go look at that. So and that's the most important one, because finding the $20 and $100 is so hard to do, and it's happening. I'm telling you, it's happening. Okay, but you won't see it in any sort of analytical way that you do it. But finding the big stuff, you're gonna see it based on the revenue trends. You are gonna see it.
So,
There's a lot of hands raised. Let me just ask this one last one, and then, well, we'll stay with the money. I want to talk about something else, but Councilor Robinson, do you have any?
Well, because he answered one of the questions that I had. And one of my questions was on the federal awards report. There was a finding this year. And is this different than the previous year? And I thought last year there weren't any findings.
Well, we do, it's a major program audit, so you are looking at different grants.
Mm-hmm.
So I do know in the case, so we had two findings. One of them was related, even though it's a universal city comment, it was on the community development block grant, which had not been looked at for a few years. And the other finding,
Policy.
actually both, yeah, exactly. So it did more so relate to just choosing different programs. But I don't know if you want me to talk in more detail about them now, or we can.
No, I just wanted to kind of get the gist of what it was.
Yeah.
Because I know in the management letter report, the audit comments with the city's response, the audit comments were different than the findings shown in the other report.
The single audit response.
Yeah.
The single audit response were different than what?
And the management report.
Yes, they're two separate, yeah. They
Two
are,
separate
they are
documents,
two
yeah.
separate. And one of the reasons for that too, is it's very important, for the Fed, because this is the single audit is going to the federal, the federal clearinghouse. And one area that we've seen a lot of issues with is we may make a passing comment in the management letter about grants and things like that. And then the Fed say, well, why, if they ever review one, they'll say, well, why isn't it in both? So honestly, what we try to do is keep them separate. So they're not showing up in more than one place.
Councilor Lopez, you had your hand up?
yes, you mentioned that auditing offices that work with money. How about the treasurer's office?
So,
If
The treasurer's office.
The treasurer's office.
If there's a, we talked about the clerk, but the
Yeah.
treasurer's office is a.
They
Collect money.
play with money all the time.
so in the treasurer's office, I mean, half the audit is in the treasurer's office. We're looking at every bank reconciliation. We're doing sample testing of deposits. We're looking at, we're tying out real estate money that's coming in to what's being recorded. So we do a lot of work in the treasurer's office itself. Most of this fraud stuff and the treasurer's office has good controls. Most of this fraud stuff that we're talking about is when you get to the outside departments, where they don't have that strong oversight and they don't have those strong controls. Like, I was doing an athletic audit, and they collect money for the Thanksgiving Day game, $7,000. The guy takes it home with him. I'm not saying here, but in this particular thing I was doing, the banks are closed and blah, blah. Well, don't you have an overnight bag? You shouldn't be taking $7,000 in cash home with you. If someone sees you doing that, number one, you're risking your safety, and number two, someone could take the money. So people in the outside departments, because they're not as structured when it comes to cash, because it's dribs and drabs. Where the treasurer's office, that's the treasurer's function, is to collect cash, so they have to have those controls. And the state also looks at the treasurer's controls. So hopefully that answers your question, that there is a lot of oversight in the treasurer's office. We're talking more about
But in the outlying departments, I just want to say, we have looked at that. We looked at that with community schools. We went to the online registration.
Right.
Instead of handling cash. We had discovered that cash was being accepted, it wasn't being turned over. The treasurer's office fast enough, so we put in new rules. So there's less of that in the library, where there's overdue books and use of copy machines. So there's not really a lot flowing to the library. It was mostly the community schools where we had seen more volume.
Does the clerk's office require you to go to the treasurer's office first and pay, and then bring the coupon?
Yes.
So that's a good control. So you're avoiding, giving money to another department.
So if there's a fee for, say, a copy of a birth certificate, they have to first pay the treasurer and then come back?
Yeah, so that's good. That's good.
Yeah, same thing with DPW, if they have the recycle
Yeah.
charges, the bins or the compost bins, they have to pay first at Treasury and then go over to DPW to get their.
I would say that the reason why it may be hard to hide a transaction in the treasurer's office is because a lot of those bills can't be deleted or hidden. If I get a parking ticket and I come in and pay for a parking ticket, there's a record somewhere. You can't, put that money in the side.
Right.
Because that's somewhere in some system. A lot of the transactions that happen in the treasurer's office is to pay a water bill. If they don't, if Leo comes in and pays his water bill for the month, and I decide not to register it, he's gonna come in within a week and say, wait a minute, I paid that, because he's gonna, right, the next month he's gonna say, wait a minute. So it's very hard, at least in that
Plus,
office.
the treasurer has cash registers.
Yeah.
So they have to do a reconciliation at the end of each night. They have to check out, and everything's got a balance, which a department head doesn't. The police, what if you're going down to the police department and paying for some permits? I don't know if the police handles any cash here, but the police don't have cash. Yeah, they don't have cash.
They
don't have cash registers. They just take the money,
Yeah.
put it in an envelope or a box, and then they turn it in once a week. And that's, like I said, I don't know what's going on here, but that's.
It should be by check. We had implemented procedures.
Check only?
We don't want cash. It should be by check. If somebody has cash, we send them to the credit union to get a money order back.
And like I said earlier, you guys have done a really good job on looking at these departments and analyzing revenues from year to year. So if there is anything happening, it would be on a minute basis, on a very, very small basis.
Councilor Brown and then Councilor Taylor.
I had one question and then I heard a little bit of conversation about, like, the athletics, like, football games and, basketball games. How do you, maybe Ed can help us with this, how do we keep a line on how much money was taken in and how much money was deposited?
Those are tough. You have to make sure you've got people that are collecting the money, have had solid background checks, that they're not kids. You don't want kids collecting money at the gate. A lot of places will sell pre-numbered tickets, but you also can pay when you go to the gate, so sometimes that doesn't help. But what I see in a good system is when I give you $5, they have 2 tickets. They give me half of the ticket, which has number 101 on it, and they keep the other half, which has 101. So at the end of the day, if you sold 1,000 tickets to that game, and it was $8 a ticket, you should have $8,000. They should be doing that reconciliation at the end of the game.
Okay.
And then they should be bringing that to the treasurer's office, the reconciliation with the money, and show it all balancing. Now, if I've got a friend and I'm collecting money, yeah, just go in. You know, that, you're not gonna prevent something like that.
Correct.
But
But the money is exchanged. That's where, because
if you
in
do
the
it with,
past, there's been, especially with high school sports,
yep,
there's been a lot of cash. And my question is, Ed, is how are we handling that now? I mean, you know, I know you have the athletic director. Are they in charge of that?
I'm not certain, I need to check that with the school department.
Okay.
See what they're doing. The treasurer could probably answer that better because she's the one receiving it.
Okay.
I can check that as well and let you know tomorrow.
So who oversees that, the school department?
The school department, so the school department will handle the concessions for the games.
So they will give you the figures how much they take in. Do they tell you how much they get?
Yeah,
They
they
don't?
turn it into the treasurer's office, so you can see that flow of activity through treasury.
So the reason why I ask that is because this is obviously a place where direct cash is always used. So one thing I don't like is when someone comes here and if they don't have cash, they have to go somewhere else and get a money order. We should have a system where we believe in our system that if someone pays cash and we said it, I think the treasurer's office is doing it. You take this down, this receipt down to the treasurer's office, you pay them, you come back, you show us the receipt or give us the receipt, and you have a transaction and you have a paper trail. I think that's an honest system, and I think that's a system that shows you also checks and balance. And I think even with the school, because I've been on the council for a while, and we've never really had an understanding of how at the end of the year, how much money is raised through different activities from the school programs. That's my question.
No, it's funny because I had a question that, there was a comment about the school departments doing activities, and this is something new to us. You want to explain to us what that comment was?
Sure, we can go there. So about 5 years ago, the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education came out with some updated guidelines. So one of the things was they reiterated a long-standing policy of theirs that wasn't necessarily enforced. That, you know, in the law it says they need to be audited annually, the student activity accounts. Unfortunately, a lot of communities said, well, we get audited annually, so that's part of it. Well, as Tony said, you know, we're doing a financial statement level audit. So our materiality for transactions may be very high, especially in Chelsea, you guys, you know, you have a large budget. So the student activity transactions would fall way under our materiality level. So while some transactions may end up in our testing, we're not specifically looking at them. So what DESE came out and said is, listen, it says they need to be audited annually. You can do it internally, 2 out of every 3 years. And internally by someone outside of the process of student activities. So it could be someone at the school who's not involved in student activities, or it could be, you know, someone from the treasurer's office, but someone independent of the process internally needs to look at it. And part of the updated guidelines was kind of a step-by-step thing for someone internally to look at. And actually, when we do it as independent auditors, we actually use those same procedures. But what they also said is at least once every 3 years, these accounts need to be audited by an independent auditing firm. When asked, they couldn't produce a report, and, you know, the business manager at the time wasn't sure when the last time they had been audited. We've been trying to set up a conference call to implement some of our recommendations, so, you know, hopefully we'll.
And just to be clear, the student activities that we're talking about here are outside of the city operations. They're the yearbook, the prom, the field trips. I, as a parent, if I give my son $5, because they're saying he's going to the Museum of Science, I want to make sure that $5 got spent on the bus, the admission, you know, and all that, not on some party that they're having, some get-together for the teachers where they buy pizzas. And that's what we find when we go through these accounts, that they end up collecting more for the field trip than the field trip costs. They have some money left over, and then they'll have some teacher meeting, and they'll all, you know, order pizzas and eat pizzas, or other things, even more malicious. So that's why this law kind of went in place by the Department of Education. So I wanted to just be clear on exactly what student activities are and represent.
I want to get back to something that, on the fraud prevention and measures, what has been making the news over the last couple of years is overtime abuse. And what I mean by that is, particularly, we saw that in the state police. We saw that in recently Boston police, story about Boston police who they were stating that they were in the court, you know, speaking at the same time they were actually working a shift. We have several departments that have the overtime: ISD, DBW, fire, and police. I'd like to know if there's any measures in place that try to make sure that we don't have that going on here, and maybe Tom can talk about it, or if you guys examined any of that sort of thing, because that is sort of fraud abuse also. So I wanted to know if you've...
Not sort of.
No, well, it is, but...
Yeah, it is. It's a different type of fraud.
Different type,
right?
but it's still, you know, money. So it's just curious to know if there's any review that you've done, you know, as far as that, because those tend to be very large numbers.
Or double dipping on the details sometimes.
Correct, any of that.
That's the one you hear about a lot, where they're on details, but they're also putting in time for, you know, the regular shift.
Correct.
Or not doing details. I mean, what he's talking about, most of these folks were not doing detail. And the last round came out with the retired police officers in Boston. A lot of them were not even doing it.
Yeah.
They weren't even there.
Yeah.
But someone was signing off on it.
Yeah.
So
Can you
I think
explain the process?
it's difficult for
The time
districts.
sheets, department head.
Right, well, yeah, unfortunately, it would be very difficult, and that's honestly, usually when these things happen, they bring in the state police, and they bring in specialists to look at it, because.
And someone rats, usually, it's not,
Yeah.
you've got an informant, it's usually not found through a process, because it is difficult.
Someone rat.
Yeah, because, go ahead, you can write it.
But we do payroll testing as part of our procedures, particularly with grants we're required to. But we also, in larger communities, especially Chelsea, we do also a test of non-grant expenditures in payroll. So we do follow it throughout the process. Unfortunately, you know, and one of our steps is, you know, take a certain payroll check, trace it back, you know, to a timesheet. So we're looking at some sort of timesheet. But unfortunately, if they're, you know, we got to take that on face value.
Yeah,
if there's a timesheet that's
if
signed
they're
off
fabricating the timesheet, right.
you know, we have to, you know, it would take someone else really digging down to get it to that point. So we get it to that. So we do look for a signed timesheet, and we also are looking for a signed, you know, transmittal or something also by, you know, in the case of police, it was the police chief or who's ever authorized to sign off. You know, in that case, we are relying on the timesheet being correct and the department head approval. You know, and we do plenty of times run into the fact that, oh yeah, you know, we pulled it and yeah, this one isn't signed off, and you know, we've like, you know.
So we're looking at that too, on a weekly basis, when we receive the payroll records submitted to us from each department. We're looking for overtime, listings by person, by hours, by date, and then we're asking for the department head to sign off on that. So we take the position that if the department head signed, that's the authorization to pay. We don't go in and say, give me the underlying timesheet that the officer filled out that created that entry. That's something that keep in the department themselves, and we rely on the department head to certify that. So if we have to go back to get recently with FEMA reviews, we had to go back and get all of the individual pieces that led into that overtime, there were sheets, we signed them, with the supervisor's signature, with the patrolman's signature, and those all have to be submitted into FEMA. So we know the police are doing it, we know fire is doing it a different way, but we're relying on the department head to sign off on the total every week before we pay it.
So there had to be collusion in some form, or a department head that's just out in left field and just signing off on anything.
So, well, you brought something up, you mentioned the word, and that was grant spending. So, the state police incident actually was part of grant spending. They had received federal grants to pay for that extra details to enforce speeding. And that was the money that was being used. It wasn't actually state general funds, but grant funding. So two things. Again, you know, if there's any checks and balances in the state police, I'm not trying to bash anyone, but the department heads were in on it. So it was all part of that whole troop that they all signed on, and it was a large mess. So it's possible that, you know, I'm just wondering if there's checks and balances beyond that to make sure it's not happening. Second, in regards to your saying grant spending, does this review auditing just talk about the spending of general funds, or do you also review in this? The city of Chelsea receives a large amount of grants that they apply for, and then the departments will spend.
Yep, we look at that.
So okay, can you talk a little bit about what that review, the grant spending is? Because again, that's something that might be ripe for any sort of abuse possible.
All right, so we are required, as Tony mentioned earlier, you spend more than 700, and it's spending, it's based on spending. If you spend more than $750,000 a year in federal funds, we're required to do an audit specifically of grants. Now, it's a major program audit, so we're not necessarily, not even necessarily, we are not supposed to look at every grant. The Office of Management and Budget specifies exactly how we're supposed to determine what is a major program.
You're muted. We can't hear you at home. Thank you.
And there is potentially the ability to look at an even smaller grant, but typically that's not what happens. Again, typically you're only looking at the larger grants. And honestly, we do about 40 of these single audits. In over half of them, it's consistently every year the special education grant on at least 20 of our 40, just because that by far is the largest grant. Even here with you guys, for coverage purpose, and we have to maintain a certain coverage as part of the rules, you have to test a certain percentage. School lunch and/or Title I here will be audited nearly, for coverage purposes, one of the two has to be audited almost every year in order for us to make the coverage. The public safety grants that you were bringing up, you know, it would really be a one-off, honestly, at this point. I know back in the day, you know, when the cops grants, you know, were a lot larger, then, you know, you would tend to look at those, but at this point, most of the public safety grants don't pop up over that threshold for us to look at. So that's typically why we're usually focusing on the much larger education grants and some of the city grants, like maybe an assistance to firefighter grant or a safer grant, sometimes, you know, the fire department, and then CDBG.
So without trying to raise eyebrows and make any sort of accusation, the conclusion is that any grants that the city has received that are under the $750,000 mark is not reviewed.
It's
not reviewed by them.
Less,
Right, it's,
But,
it's,
yeah.
well, it's potentially, because there's also, I mean, there is what they call an A program and a B program. So, your A programs are over 750,000, your B programs are between 187,500 and 750,000. So there is a possibility that we do look at B programs. So that, but it's still, it would have to be over that $187,500 floor to be potentially part of the equation.
So like a council on aging grant, that your senior department gets, that wouldn't be looked at. It's probably $80,000 or $90,000. It's way under scope, and they use that also for expenses or whatever they do. But we wouldn't look at that. Just to answer your question.
Okay. No, and again, it's just to, I guess it's just, again, it's not trying to be accuse or anything, but.
You're trying to understand.
If you're trying to understand, but
Yeah.
also say, if I had to look at anything, that would be my focus, because the big ones are gonna be reviewed. If I wanted to just pay attention to anything, you'd wanna focus on the smaller fish, basically. Because that, just
Right.
to see where it's going.
And in the old days, when I was just getting out of college and everything, we used to have a time clock that we used to have to punch. Those don't exist anymore. Now, they're just doing it on a computer, a transmittal sheet, they're hand filling things out, so.
I'll let Ed rebut, so just again.
Well, no, I was gonna say that if they don't look at it, that doesn't mean it's not being looked at.
Okay.
So my office receives the grant setup paperwork, and within that paperwork, there are guidelines that say what the performance period is, what it can be spent on, we set up a budget, we are tracking the budget expenses. No, we don't get an overtime sheet from the police department when there's an overtime expenditure, but we do get an overtime request through the payroll. And so we rely again on the department has a signature on that payroll, but we're not looking at grants without the detail. We're looking at all the detail of the grants. We're making sure that they're complying. We have to close them out in a specific way and not spend past the date that they are no longer allowed to spend on. We get the grant funder approval for extensions. We require that, but we don't allow it to go forward. So there's a lot of oversight over the grant operations, not so much the individual overtime listings or salary listings that come through, because we rely on the department for that. But we are looking at everything else related to grants. And furthermore, if the grant funder was to award a new grant, they'd want to look first at how was the previous year run and what was the audit finding, or was there an audit finding on that particular grant. They ask for the single audit report, many of these agencies, before they provide us with an approval for a new grant.
Okay.
So it always has saying that if we have problems on our audits, they're not going to give us a new grant. If we have problems spending on our previous grants, they're not going to give us a new one.
Councilor Taylor, then Recupero.
So I don't want to belabor this anymore. I think it's been gone over enough. But another area that I was wondering about is parking meters, because this has been a problem in other cities and not too far away.
I did that review.
And so I know that some of the parking meters you now can do by credit card, or if you're parking,
smart ones,
but it's still, I know you can use the money for this. So what is the procedure for, because you can never really prove how many cars are being parked at so there's lots of
They're broken into districts. They probably have to rely on the clerk's office and the treasurer's office to get more detail, but my understanding is that the meters are broken into districts based on the geographic location of the city. The collections are done off of those meters in a certain bag that relates to that district. So that as you count those, which is probably delivered to the bank by the branch operator, and then it's counted by the bank and delivered as a number back to the treasurer's office, we are able to determine if the collections on that particular route for that particular week agrees with the next week, and the week after that, the week after that. And if it's off a specific dollar amount that raises concern, then we start to worry about whether something's going on with those collections.
Do your meters count the points? Are they smart? Are they the smart meters, or they're the old? They're the old turnkey meters. Yeah.
So harder to get a count on, a real count on how
And
many.
I assume only
How many
one,
coins are in versus how many coins are coming out.
and I assume only one person probably empties the meters, because you're not gonna have.
Yeah, they're in a lockbox. I mean,
Yeah.
I say bag, but when it comes out of the lockbox, it's not.
So typically, and what was happening in Revere, was there's a safe in the meter.
Yeah.
The quarter goes in to the safe. The guy emptying the meters can't get into that safe. He's got a trolley
Yeah, same here.
that just turns, and the quarters go in, and then he doesn't have the key to the trolley. The treasurer's office has the key to the trolley. I'm assuming the same
Yes.
process is in place here. The problem with Revere is they were broken. The safes were broken, so, and a lot of the meters didn't have safes in them, because they had not been replaced, so they had been broken, taken out, so the quarters were just sitting, in the, and if someone wanted to help themselves to quarters, they could. And we found the same thing in another city up north, that we went in and looked at, so.
Councilor Cooper?
I have two questions. One with the meters, right? The meters that don't have money and they have the cards or the
Yeah.
phones, right? How are they recorded? How does the treasury know what it is through all these phones? How do they figure out how much they collect through that?
You get a tape from the company. The company sends you a tape of how much went through.
Right.
They'll tell you how many quarters.
Just like a credit card.
It's just like a cash register. They tell you how many quarters went through, how many credit cards went through, what the debit cards went through, and then you reconcile that to your take. So the smart meters, and when we were driving, I was looking around and I said, I don't think they have smart meters. It just might have been one area, but it doesn't look like you have smart meters in the.
You can pay by phone.
You can pay by phone, right. So, but you still have the option of putting the quarters in and it doesn't count them.
Yeah.
And I don't know how many meters you have, but you have
Is that something that you would recommend us,
100%.
Expending money on?
100%.
Okay.
So Revere has got their investment back twofold.
Yeah.
Yes, I would definitely, that's, everywhere I go, I make that recommendation. You guys should have smart meters. I've done 3 of these audits now of parking meters, and I find the same thing everywhere.
Yeah.
Cooper, your second question?
Yeah, the next question is, on details, right? The city pays the money in advance, right? For the details that's being done outside, and then it recovers the money for whoever the details are being used for, right? So, how long does it take for the city to recover that money?
Is that how you do it here?
We pay in advance, yes.
So you pay the payroll or the cost in advance, and then you collect?
We monitor that on a monthly basis. We're monitoring that for reconciliation with General Ledger. The payment activity, if it is not paid by a certain time frame, there's a 60 to 90 day time frame where it goes into the law department, and the law department will send communications to the individual or company that owes the police and fire detail that hasn't been paid. So lately, what we've found is we have a lot of construction going on in the city, so we have a lot of companies that we're dealing with, and a lot of police details. So we're not concerned about those numbers because we know they're companies, with reputable companies, there is a lot owed, and that's going to be paid either throughout the project or at the end of the project. The smaller ones that don't get paid and ignore the bills that are received, we deal with those through a collection process with the law department. And then they go to court, and one of 2 things happens: either they're allowed to pay or they're allowed not.
But you ever have any that don't pay at all? Has the city ever lost any money?
Yes, well, I don't know if we lost money. We've gone to court, and the court has said it isn't owed. And so if that's the case, if the court sides with the individual rather than the city, now we come back to council at some point and say there is an overdue amount on fire details or police details that isn't going to be paid. We're going to be looking for an allotment of free cash stabilization to cover that. There's nothing we can do. If we've exhausted all of our options to try to collect, and the court has said that we cannot collect, we still have an outstanding receivable that we have to cover.
My experience both here and Revere is whenever you have a system, and it's usually been negotiated through collective bargaining, where the city agrees to pay up front. At the end of the day, the city always gets stuck with some uncollectible detail money, and you're always running deficits in those accounts. It It was the nature of the business in Revere, it's the nature here. You know, I don't know, there may be some cities where their contracts say the police, you gotta wait for the check from the utility company, but most cities,
Yeah, right.
most cities operate the way Revere and Chelsea do. You pay the police and fire, and you try to wait for the check.
I got one question.
Council Robinson?
I know we started looking at the retirement system, and there's a report that's here. Does that show a different information than what's in the management letter?
Which retirement report?
This
Must be that,
Chelsea retirement system.
system report.
Yeah.
Okay, so that contributory retirement system report is just a report on specific items that's required in order for us to determine the actual net pension liability. That does not represent an audit. However, because we need to issue that report, we do have to perform some limited procedures to make sure that the data, is appropriate. So there was actually a finding in our management letter, while we were doing that testing, we did find one or two of the deductions, weren't coded in the payroll system, the way they should, and it was causing an issue, with it, not the correct amount of money was flowing to the pension system. So, what our recommendation was that, on, a regular basis, with, an annual basis, that both the retirement system and the city auditor's office sit down, go through the listing of the pay codes and make sure that they're calculated correctly. Because obviously, as time goes on, different pay codes get added. One of them was, the Narcan, stipend, so sometimes things get added on the fly, and, it doesn't, the whole ramifications of putting in the payroll
It gets
system.
lost in the system there.
Exactly. And the staff who did that testing, did extrapolate it out. It wasn't a significant or material amount of money, but it wasn't an amount of money, so that, that's why we.
Yeah, it needs to be corrected, we're working through this with the retirement director. to make those corrections.
Anyone at home would have any questions? If there's anyone who wants to raise their hand. We have 4 councilors. No? No one? Okay. Ended just on time. We at 7:30. We appreciate it. If there's any questions, we'll follow up and reach out to you. But I appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Ed, do you want me to email you?
Yeah.
This,
that'd be
so you
correct.
can have it.
And then I
We've got another copy.
presentation, and we can post it.
Yes, absolutely. Okay.
Oh, do you want her to keep the extras?
We already emailed it to all the councilors, so we're fine. But if you want to post it, it's fine.
What's up, baby?
How are you?
What, you coming around?
I'm gonna try.
Can I sit here?
Yeah, absolutely, dude.
We have the next one, right?
Now it's public safety. Yeah.
Yeah.
Did we, are we supposed to have?
Yeah, they clown.